So Judy, are you wanting to go straight to the clinic or are we going to the house first?
We're going to your house.
Okay.
Interest in President Kennedy's proposed Peace Corps continues to rise among American youth. Here are the forerunners of the Peace Corps, American exchange students, now overseas in backward and depressed areas of the world, giving of their strength, skills, and education in tasks similar to the missions that will be assigned to Peace Corps members.
In 1961, President Kennedy appointed Sergeant Shriver director of the Peace Corps and sent the first volunteers to Africa. In 1966, our group of 65 volunteers went to Niger to work in agriculture, dig wells for drinkable water, and teach the women how to better care for their infants. This is our collective story.
Once a week, the women come to have their babies weighed at the dispensary. We check if the baby's growth is constant or whether there is a falling off, which could mean a lack of vitamin or other nutritional imbalance. We've come to know something of the life of every mother and child. We've come to feel very close to them. Hadi and Chima are taking over an increasing share of the work we do together with the women of Buza. What has been started here will bear fruit in later years when these babies will have grown into men and women. How many deaths, how much disease, how much suffering will have been prevented is something that cannot be measured.
Vous avez été volontaire du corps de la paix. Vous avez vécu dans des tout petits hameaux, dans des tout petits villages, sans rien. Sans rien. Pas de commodité, aucune commodité. Pas d'eau potable, rien du tout. Comment ces jeunes Américains, 18 ans, 19 ans, 20 ans, 21 ans, qui n'ont jamais quitté les États-Unis, qui laissent leur confort et qui vont à l'aventure. Je dis, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont derrière la tête? Sincèrement, est-ce que c'est le goût de l'aventure? Est-ce que c'est aller découvrir un autre monde? Ou bien parce qu'ils s'ennuyaient chez eux, n'est-ce pas? Il y a tout chez eux, on s'ennuie, donc je veux me désennuyer en allant ailleurs.
The country was also going through a whole series of changes, of young people thinking that they were at the front of changes and that we knew more than our parents.
I grew up in Fresno in the 50s, and Eisenhower was our president. The only women I knew were either wives and mothers or nuns. And I didn't want to be a wife, and I certainly did not want to be a nun.
You know, of course, I'd heard about the Peace Corps, but I hadn't done much research on it. But I didn't think that I have a prayer of being accepted because I was just a BA generalist. I had no practical skills. I decided that I would try for it.
I didn't go with an altruistic motive that I was going to change people's lives or help them in any meaningful way, because I was not that naive. I mean, I knew that I would perhaps perform a function when I was there, but I was more interested in my own personal development.
To get out of the draft was a big part of it, and then to see another part of the world was another. And I applied, and I was shocked. And 3 days before I graduated, I got the acceptance thing.
I think the major concern was actually basically I was cannon fodder, so it was like I was looking for alternatives to the war.
On one hand, I was idealistic and wanted to do something good. On the other hand, I wanted to do something adventuresome. And then, of course, there was the whole Vietnam War thing, and this was a way of forgetting about that for a while.
Military service was not something that I necessarily would have avoided, but I did not want to participate in that war, and the odds are that I would be sent to Vietnam. At the same time, I definitely feel that I need to honor those who did go, because they served, and they suffered.
While the guys were avoiding the draft, the women wanted better options than those that were offered at the time. The feminist movement had recently taken to the streets. But the young women who chose the Peace Corps were different. We were strong women, determined to forge our own destiny and to be of use.
You remember when we graduated, you had 4 options: wife, secretary, teacher, and nurse. So the Peace Corps came along and gave us another option.
What did you see were your options as a woman?
Well, I was going to say, as far as my parents and their influence, I was very, very protected by them. And it was amazing to me that they even allowed me to go to the school in Switzerland and to live for a year in Paris, because they worried all the time. They wouldn't let me have summer jobs, and they wanted me to just go to college, be educated, and be married, and have the husband continue taking care of me, So when I decided I was going to go in the Peace Corps, they were quite shocked. My father threatened to have a heart attack. It was very hard for them, and it was the best thing in the world for me to get off on my own in this exotic place with these exotic people, meaning Peace Corps volunteers as well as Africans. So I finished growing up there.
I was in college. I was at Wellesley, and it was a heavy academic load. I wanted out of academia. I wanted to do something that was a little adventuresome, that was not going to be writing papers. I didn't want to have to lose any more nights worrying about exams or papers that were due, and I wanted to learn something that I felt was real. I'm not shy about traveling, and I'd been to France, and I liked adventure. I wanted to see how other people in the world lived. I just felt like this was a different kind of learning that I was very ready for. My father wasn't so happy about it, but my mother and brother very much supported me, so I felt good to have their support.
Since you had the role model of Jackie Kennedy, who spoke all these languages, I thought, well, why don't I learn to speak some other languages? Why don't I learn about the world?
When I arrived in Niger, I was in my Black Power phase. This was a time when we were changing what we called ourselves. We went from Negroes, do you want to call yourself Black? Do you want to call yourself African American? Change the way you looked, because you're going to change the way you wear your hair, change the way you dress if you decide you want to now start wearing Afrocentric clothes. problem with Peace Corps is that all my friends were convinced that they were CIA.
Our adventure began at Fort Funston, west of San Francisco on the Pacific Ocean. It was a miserable training site that could not prepare us for the conditions we would soon encounter in the Sahara. But putting us together in this dreadful place bonded us for life. Imagine sleeping side by side in a room with 35 strangers for 3 months.
Well, Fort Funston was very surreal. To me, it was from another planet. We had this abandoned Nike missile base with one active missile site. We had a Defense Department scientist doing experimental explosions across the way, all these abandoned gun emplacements for World War II defense of San Francisco.
It was cold and damp and foggy, and I wouldn't say that the Peace Corps treated us in the best way possible.
Fort Funston was interesting. I was older than most of the other volunteers. I was 25. I'd spent some time in a monastery and done other things, and so that was kind of interesting. I had a bunch of kids, and I remember Buck McAdoo as being quite young at that time. And I had a buzz cut, and there were a lot of hippies there with longer hair. And so I was pretty nervous when I got off the bus. Then I froze my ass off because San Francisco in the summertime is cold. And we had that guy, I can't remember his name, that was kind of the master sergeant who ran the barracks. And he wouldn't give us any more than one blanket. And we started a revolt, and we finally got 2 blankets.
They did some crazy things to us at Fort Funston. They didn't have a clue as to what would take a volunteer the whole way, what skills you needed to have and what would be the right personality for the deal.
So do you remember training?
A little bit.
What do you remember?
Oh, I remember trying to plow ice plant with an ox and a steer. The barracks and the cold. It was really, it was almost criminal that they took us from Fort Funston and popped us down into Niamey in the hot season.
In the empty mess hall, there was this table where they'd stacked mail by alphabet, and they would insert pink slips in the mail stack, so A, B, C, D, and if there was a pink slip with somebody's name, you knew they were dead, they were gone, they would just disappear. And deselection, by the way, in the training process was a traumatic thing.
We wanted to succeed, but occasionally we would go back to the Quonset hut and there'd be a vacant bed. And they were very surgically removed during the day. I don't know how they did it. We would never know. Someone would be approached and gone, and they would be gone by that night. And it was very stressful to know that it could happen to us.
There were certain weirdness things, like watching out for the solitary drinker, and the certain things that got you deselected from the Peace Corps.
Were we assigned to do that? I don't remember. Were you supposed to spy?
No, we weren't assigned to, but the psychologist was assigned to look for whether someone would do well in country.
We had to be psychologically perfect for the 3 psychiatrists and 4 psychologists. We had to be well balanced. We had to present this image. It was very stressful in the sense that you couldn't really be yourself. I knew when I signed up that you could not be gay in the Peace Corps at that time. And of course, being out of the closet for years and having to go through an experience like that was very stressful.
Do you remember our psychiatrists and psychologists at Funston?
Oh, yes, the famous shrink. I know, he was a dreadful person, if I may say so, because I think he really scared many of the trainees. And I didn't understand why he went through what we call deselection process. And I saw people going out of his office in tears because they were told they were not, fit to go to Niger. But how would he know? He had never been there himself.
The people I had problems with, actually, with the, we call them the shrink. The psychologist whose job it was to determine whether or not you were suitable material for this experience we were going to have. And I was determined to be unsuitable. So that was That was my main problem in Peace Corps training.
Not because you didn't want to go, just because you didn't like them. Did you respect what they were doing?
No. The problem that I had, one, I was defined as too educated, because I had a master's degree. That I was defined as an urbane intellectual who could not live in rural Africa, and therefore who would not be able to relate to these African peasants whose mentality I wanted to try to understand, versus this model they had of what an ideal Peace Corps volunteer would be, somebody who would go out to the rural area and live with the people and get along.
Getting up at 5:30 for soccer, things I never did before. I'd never held a soccer ball, I'd never held a basketball. I never played basketball in my life. But whatever I had to do, I tried to do it, just to get through those 3 months. I killed a chicken, I chopped its head off. I never killed a chicken in Niger, never. And I wouldn't do it now. I don't even eat chicken anymore. But if I had to kill a chicken to show that I was worthy of going over there, I'd do it. So, it worked.
It meant that much to you?
Yeah, it did. Well, once you're in a training situation, no one wants to fail. We had to get through.
We had 13 Nigerians at Fort Funston who came to teach us the local languages and the customs of Niger. Arifa Tijani was my Kanuri teacher, and we became close friends. We even killed the chicken together. There was a 2-week break between training and leaving for Niger, so I asked Arifa to come home with me to Fresno.
Bon, on était les amis à Fort Funston et tu es venu chez moi à Fresno. Tu peux parler à ça?
Oui. Quand on a fini la formation, tu m'as demandé est-ce que je dois rentrer directement au Niger. J'ai dit oui, je vais rentrer directement au Niger. Tu m'as dit est-ce que tu peux faire 1 semaine ou 2 semaines chez moi à Fresno. J'ai dit oui, je n'ai pas. J'ai répondu tout de suite oui. C'est vrai, avec toi, donc on est parti à Fresno. J'ai passé un séjour vraiment formidable à Fresno. Ça, vraiment, je n'oublierai pas.
Fresno était plus petit et vraiment chaud.
Oui.
Comme
mais comme au Niger, voilà.
Oui.
Non, il ne fait pas, c'est pas aussi chaud qu'au Niger, mais le problème, c'est qu'il y a beaucoup de vergers. C'est vraiment intéressant. Alors que le Niger est un pays sec, alors quand tu pars à Fresno, quelqu'un qui vient de Goudou Maria, n'est-ce pas, où c'est une oasis, tout le reste c'est du désert, et tu vas à Fresno, la différence, elle est claire, franchement.
Ma mère,
elle est gentille, elle est superbe. Elle était superbe, franchement. Et Jeanne, ta sœur,
oui.
Je me sentais vraiment comme chez moi. Je ne sais pas, est-ce que c'est l'atmosphère de notre groupe à San Francisco ou bien c'est ta présence, mais franchement, à Fresno, je ne me suis jamais senti étranger, je me suis senti vraiment comme si j'étais chez moi jusqu'à mon départ.
After 3 tough months at Fort Funston, we arrived in Niger, where we lived and worked for 2 years. Did you have any kind of preconceived ideas about Africa or saving the world or?
Probably not saving the world, and Africa, Tarzan movies, that was it. In fact, I remember when our plane landed in Niamey, no one got up. They just sat there like, where in the hell are we?
Did you have any expectations of the Peace Corps?
I thought I might die in Africa. I gave away everything I had before I left.
Why did you think you might die?
Just, it was so unknown to me.
And when you got there, did you still think you were going to die?
No. I realized I would not, that I was very safe there.
Were you happy there?
Very happy. I was happy all the time I was there.
They sent all the girls out in partners. They did not send all the guys out with a partner. No volunteer has ever been east of Zander. From Niamey to Zander is a washboard road, which means that if you go too slow, you have to like right on top of the washboard. So we raced to Zander, which still took a week. Then from Zander to Guda Maria became nothing but sand. And the sand would blow so hard that there was no road. You go, does this driver know where we're going? It's just straight into the Sahara. So Marietta and I got out in Difa. And they had no house for us. They really didn't even know we were coming.
We broke down and ended up taking camels to Guda Maria. And the mobile medical team was there, and they needed help, and we weren't going anywhere. So I helped them for a couple of days. And I got the bug. They handed me a book called The Sick African and the Merck Manual and said, read it. And being someone with no medical past at all, I kind of just fell into it.
They talked about culture shock, and I think they talked about it in kind of a wrong way. I think the culture shock was more being thrown back on your own resources. And if you had tendencies towards going goofy, that it was there for you to do if you wanted it. When I was going a little bit nuts, I got pretty scared. So it's like the anxiety gets in there, and it's like once you get anxiety, it's like, wow, it's Africa's a scary place for that. You don't want to be walking around with a lot of anxieties. I guess maybe some of it was depression. Some of it was, psychotic stuff. Some of it was, drug, alcohol, dehydration, whatever, illness. Just the illness could wear you down, affect how you looked at the world. I probably had a high level of dependence upon other Peace Corps people's ability to take care of business, and I tag on and follow along, and by God, it worked out okay. So I know that about myself.
Were you lonely?
Incredibly at times. I thought that I was going to die there. I was incredibly alone because I didn't feel like there was anybody who could really understand fully what I was experiencing. I didn't associate that much with other Peace Corps volunteers because many times when we got together, we sort of interfered with our individual experience of being in Africa. We talked about the United States. We talked about how painful it was to be there. We consoled each other in ways that I'm not sure was healthy, because I think that learning to experience transformation means that we go through pain, we go through discomfort, and get to the other side. And to console ourselves in the way that we did when we got together. And we all did that at times, and that was good, but it didn't feel like it was something that was positive for me.
We all experienced these discontinuities in our lives and had to somehow get through them and get stronger from them.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the Christmas parties?
They were real parties. Boy, we got people from everywhere. People came from Niamey. It was almost like a reunion of training, All these people out in that country, which was huge, and we'd never see them. And then Christmas, they'd all come in, and it was like old friends coming, out of the woodwork.
We needed each other in these parties.
We did.
Yeah.
We had the added advantage, I think, of being really good friends, almost from the get-go. We had to stick together. And then once we got there, we really had to stick together because we were isolated in a culture and a religion that we really had almost no clue about before we got there.
You had entered into a country and a place which was outside your kin, where people had been living for some centuries in a harsh environment, so harsh that we actually couldn't imagine it, and that they were kind of doing okay.
The times were good, if you remember that. Everybody's flocks were burgeoning. Everybody felt rich. It was a good time. You know, the granaries were pretty full. We were full of ideas of how to do practical things that might make agriculture better.
Do you think you did?
Oh, I don't think we had much of an effect. You know, if you measure it in fields plowed before and fields plowed afterwards, I think there was zero effect.
Almost anything that you did from the outside based upon some kind of idealistic approach was usually doomed to failure. And not only that, it made things worse.
They used traditional farming methods. We were given a plow that was operated behind a donkey, which we never really distributed because no one really wanted to use it. They don't like to work behind donkeys because it's so demeaning for a man. I mean, the whole idea was they use something called the daba that just, when they cultivate, it just takes the top of the plant off and it leaves all the roots, and it sort of goes against the Western philosophy of cultivation, turning over the earth. They don't turn over the earth.
In a desert situation, you don't want to stir up the soil. You just want to get your plant in there, so you go and put a stick in there and chunk your stick down in and get your seed down, and that's it. I mean, you don't want to make, if you go in and dig up the earth, it makes whatever little moisture there is dissipate quicker. And then so when they brought in plows and stuff like that, I said, no, wait, stop.
It wasn't our role to change all of these things about the culture, but rather to do what little bitty bits of first world knowledge that could benefit other people.
Masha
maybe you found out that many of the Peace Corps projects, deal with water. And water is life, actually. So it's not surprising when most of the volunteers want to really get funding for water projects. And because this reduces the incidence on diarrheal diseases, on the health of the women, and also it diminishes all the chores of the women, especially if they have a clean water source. They don't have to walk for miles to get water, so it can give them more time to devote to their children, more time to cook, more time to really take care of their business, of their home, and improve their living conditions.
In these little villages, 200 people or less, fairly isolated, they were, women were carrying water on their heads in these heavy earthen jars, sometimes 12 kilometers each way. And water was a real problem. It's a desert. There are no, besides the Niger River, there's no running water or standing water. And at that time, there weren't even, later there have been dams built to catch rainwater, monsoon water, but at that time, water was really rationed in these little villages. So there are a lot of things that don't happen. You're not as clean as you would normally be. You just can't bathe that often. Utensils aren't cleaned as well. And so this was a self-help project. The United States provided the volunteers. We would run 3, 4, 5 wells being dug at once. And the volunteers would drive around in these power wagons bringing cement and re-rod and theoretically technical assistance when there was a problem with it.
It's like the leaning tower of pizza going down into the well. But you don't want it to lean. You want it to go straight down so that it's aligned perfectly. What you want, ideally, is 5 or 6 feet, or maybe even 10 feet of water in the bottom of the well.
Tried to avoid going down wells as much as possible. Those little dark holes way down there on this rope. You look, claustrophobia. But yeah, it was fun.
Who designed these wells?
There was a brilliant USAID guy and a couple of volunteers in earlier Peace Corps groups. So the UN provided re-rod. Nigerians, they had one cement plant, and they provided the cement. The village chiefs provided volunteer labor.
Okay, well, these are patterns that I painted on the wells much later. Prior to this, I had a whole book of designs, of different designs for them to choose from. And I'd hand the notebook over to the village chief, and he would find the Dangle Adema and the other village elders, and they'd sit under the neem tree, and they would debate. And sometimes it was a couple of hours, sometimes it was a couple of days while I, slept in the power wagon for them to decide which design they wanted for their village. I just decided to do a black and white pattern, and I love doing a little squirrely pattern, then doing concentric circles around it. I just did it in black and white, and I thought it was striking. And they were trying to bring the camels over, but they wouldn't go anywhere near it. They thought it was a dead zebra or something. So I had to put colors on it, on the larger bullseyes, and that worked. And then the camels were able to approach. Yeah, they knew the zebras didn't have colors.
I went back 15 years later to do a Story for Life magazine. And I didn't recognize the villages that I went into, because what none of us expected was that they would use this water to make mud bricks and make better houses. They were just much more comfortable, and the villages were really transformed. They had gardens. It was a great program. It really was.
Public health, clean water, nutrition were the biggest impact things that we could do. The health education people and the Peace Corps volunteers involved in the well baby clinics were the most important volunteers for improving African health.
The well baby clinic was great because a lot of women did not get out of their compounds. Chopping millet, taking care of the extended family. The women with babies all the way up to probably 6 or 8 years old would bring their kids. It was a great excuse for them to get all dressed up in their finest. So it was a social event. Mothers just sort of stop weaning their babies, and the baby doesn't want to eat the hot food that the adult food. Teaching them how to very simply make like a carrot puree. The mothers were thrilled to learn how to help their babies. At that time, there was a 50% mortality rate, and no mother wants to see her baby die of malnutrition.
We had a well baby clinic in Guray, and I and another Peace Corps volunteer. It was well established by the time we got there. So it was just getting the mothers to come to the clinic once a week during their pregnancy, and then to deliver at the maternity building with a midwife rather than to just crouch in the sand like they were used to doing.
Since we had the birth registry, we knew when every kid turned 6 months, because that's when they started weaning and becoming sick because they lost their breast milk or their mother got pregnant again. And they were chubby, healthy, fine kids until then.
Sandy Poisa from Mattawa and I, we put together classes and we exchanged them with one another. She taught in Mattawa, I taught in Buza, and we taught the kids about symptoms so they could recognize the various kinds of diseases that were coming and how to prevent them or how to take care of them, measles or whatever. And you know something, in 9 months after we were in Buza, we saw a difference.
I went into the homes, the households of 200 different people from every segment of life, and I worked with mothers and their babies. And I made home visits. And if the baby was, I showed people how to make millet porridge, repair a solution for diarrhea, squash puree, liver puree, and we talked about hygiene and flies and what to do if you have conjunctivitis. And then we got past all that. There was no serious problem. You could just sit down and talk for a bit. It was the dream job if you really wanted to try to understand Africa at the grassroots level.
So you said it was very liberating. How did you experience that as a woman in Niger?
I felt extremely free, and set me up for the rest of my life, that women don't have to be second-class citizens, that you can actually be in charge of your own sexuality. Did you have a boyfriend?
Jean-Pierre.
And who was he?
He was a French militaire. He was doing his military service, doing much the same kind of agricultural promotion. And a few months after we arrived in town, Jean-Pierre moved in practically across the street. Sorry.
The only Nigerian women that I knew were prostitutes. And I think that was a conscious decision of a lot of men.
The word for divorced woman in Hausa and the word for prostitute is the same, karawa. If a woman is divorced, and it's very easy in Islamic society, she doesn't really have too many alternatives. She goes to the nearest large city and usually becomes a prostitute.
It was a totally alternate lifestyle, I suppose, compared to what else they were going to do. It would be farmers, or be wife number 3, and just bear children and pound millet. So this gave these women another perspective, and I think that I actually admire that.
There are women called the Magajias, sort of the head madam who is very close to the political structure. The Magajia, when I moved into Agadez, she came into my house. She just walked through the door. I had no idea who she was. She was dressed in incredible flowing gowns and cloths, much more than anyone else had. And she was just whirling all around my house, wanting me to come over and visit. Being gay, I really didn't want to get too involved with her scene. She happened to live very close by, and it made me a little uncomfortable, but after a while she left me alone. But she did often visit me.
Was Mariama a prostitute, a businesswoman?
She worked at a bar, and I never saw her with another man, but I assumed that she was with other men because I wasn't supporting her. I don't know how to define people in that way. She was not a prostitute in the classical sense of the word. She certainly wasn't. She comforted me a great deal. She taught me a lot.
Nothing would be more disruptive than to be involved with either a single unmarried woman or somebody's wife. I mean, that just, I know it was different for the women.
They didn't really know whether we were women or men in some respect. Here we were, independent, living on our own, when they had ceremonies where men and women were separated, they really didn't know where we should be. We really weren't like the women of the village, except in the fact that we were 21 and not married. We were more like prostitutes than the respectable women of the village.
Love was quite free in those days in Africa, and thank goodness it was before the AIDS epidemic. There was something very attractive and very exciting about the black and white combination, and so it just came about very naturally, I think.
I had two relationships. One was the first year with a teacher from Togo, but the second year was a much more significant relationship. This was like Sex in the Village.
When I went to Gure, just riding in that bus at night into the sands, into the twilight, I had this overpowering feeling that I was going to meet a very important love of my life in this little village. And I thought, how could that be? But as it turned out, a few days later, we lived right next door to the first vice president of the National Assembly. And I fell head over heels in love with him, and he felt, I think, the same toward me. So we kept up this relationship during the 2 years that I was there.
It was incredibly meaningful to me. I mean, I've really felt very connected and was very sad to leave.
In 2008, 40 years later, 5 of us went back to Niger to revisit the country, see our old friends, and witness how our work had influenced the people there.
Je suis un vieil puisatier qui a fait des puits exactement comme ça. Yeah, you can see the first views, that's that first ring, that first step. Cette espèce de puits, c'était une innovation de Guadeloupe. The innovative side of it was to dig a meter, cement a meter, dig a meter, cement a meter, with a metal form that dropped down as the diggers reached each meter. I'm told this is for animals and farming only, not because it's not right in town.
Akwai irin da ya kamata a sa. Salad, carrot, chou, tomate, poivron, et puis pomme de terre.
Bonjour madame. Ça va ici? Oui, oui. Ça va à Niamey? Merci madame. J'ai Hi madame. Get a real close up.
If those incredible women have the opportunity, to better education, if they have opportunity to getting knowledge, if they have the opportunity to acquiring more skills, they will be amazing. And the country would be, of course, the one that would be benefiting. So I think that's, and also I believe that, anything Men can do, women can do. So, and it's not, you know, it's feasible, it's possible in this country too.
The women still looked so much healthier than they did when we were here.
And the children. You know, it was such an innovation for me as a Peace Corps volunteer to have the registry. Now, even in this little village that we went to, it's all there. Visits from 6 months, telling them about nutrition, outreach. That was a huge innovation. Every child comes and is started in the program, and they weigh them, then they measure them.
This is the first time that I've seen them giving tests for malaria.
Isn't it fabulous? We didn't have any of these resources. Every child who has a fever gets sent to the next station where they prick their finger, put a drop of blood in this test. 15 minutes later, they know if they have malaria.
Come on, kid. When talking about women, one thing that I really enjoyed and realized is that no matter where we are from, we are the same. We have the same issues, you know. We have, I won't say the same perception of life, but that, you know, that depends on our culture. But we are the same. No matter if you are black, white, yellow. I can't talk about those who live in Mars, but, you know, if there are some. But that was wonderful. So throughout my Peace Corps career, I was personally very, very enthusiastic, you know, not only about the work, but the, you know, the human relationship that you build. You know, I think it makes Peace Corps exceptional. You know, you can work somewhere where you don't even have to, you know, have social lives with people. You know, you just work, make money, and there's nothing that really touches your life. And that's different in Peace Corps. People are here, and they make you feel more proud of your country. You know, they make you feel more proud of your culture, things that you take for granted, you know.
I wrote letters. I wrote my mother, I wrote my family, detailed letters about Niger. And I said, let me look and see what I wrote my first letter home from Niger. And you know what I wrote about? The colors of the sunsets. In just this, you know, very vivid detail. So maybe there were things that I found offensive or made me uncomfortable. But what I wrote my family about was, and it's, you know, what the dust does to sunsets, just the most incredibly beautiful sunsets.
So the second year was just a cultural experience for me. There were no pretensions of helping or changing and all that myth making that I didn't buy into at first. You know, it just wasn't happening. But I was able to grow, I think, and in a way that I hadn't had the opportunity before because I was living with nomads successfully. So that was the big accomplishment from my 2 years, knowing that I could live on that level and be happy anywhere.
The last 6 months was fairly easy just because I was counting down and I knew I was going home. But there was a mixture of sadness as well. I had a person who worked for me, David, that I had learned to love, and I didn't know what was going to happen to him when I left.
If you can spend someplace for 2 years, you're actually going to learn something about the culture, learn something about yourself, learn something about language.
It impelled me to be interested in other people's well-being after I came back, just about all my jobs have been in the interest of helping people. I'm what people call a liberal, bleeding liberal, or a do-gooder. I don't know what to say. That was what the experience did to me. I look for people who have other people's well-being at heart as my friends. Any other question?
I thought the Peace Corps is a cool idea. It's a great idea to do that. And I still maintain that. I still think that in the field of foreign policy, one of the finest ideas that ever was come upon anywhere is the Peace Corps.
Did you love your job? Did you have fun?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often, at the time, thought that I had the best job in the best country in the Peace Corps. I love the Nigerians. I mean, I thought they were such wonderful people. And I love being in a desert. I've always lived in a desert. I grew up in a desert. I just loved doing something that was fundamentally helpful, you know, apart from ideology.
Once I got there and realized what we had to do wasn't really going to work, but maybe nothing had to work. Maybe part of it was just living there, getting to know people from another culture, sharing experiences, having this exchange that was enriching and exciting and eye-opening, and so finding another project was great. I'm glad we found something else, but that wasn't as important as just living in this village and getting a sense of how other people in the world live and other ways of looking at the world and other ways of looking at nature and getting a different perspective on what the world is all about. And
making chocolate pudding.
And making a lot of chocolate pudding. Learning to cook new things in new ways. So, and I was very happy to be in a small village with not a whole lot of other volunteers around. And my father's fears aside, I was not lonely. I felt incredibly loved and incredibly nurtured and just became a part of this life that was wholesome and beautiful and quite glorious.
Did you resolve your relationship with Tanimoon before you left Niger?
I was crazy enough to think that by the end of my 2 years, that being Muslim, that he would marry me because I knew he could have numerous wives. I would be the city wife, and Hadisa, his wife, would be the village wife. But fortunately for me, he had no intentions of doing that. He said that he'd like to set me up in Switzerland and that he would come visit me. In other words, you know, set me up for life as his mistress. And somehow I had enough sense to know that I did not want to do that. So I fled Niger. I came away from it brokenhearted and really anxious to have my own husband and create a family of my own and not have to be secret about it.
Talk to me a little bit about coming back and your choices.
It was awful.
I was miserable. I missed Niger so badly. I remember people saying, well, how was Africa? And that was it. They didn't want to hear a response. These are not my priorities anymore. I don't fit here. So I turned around and went back on my own and spent 6 months.
When you got home, what was reentry like? Because for many people that we've interviewed, culture shock was not going to Niger. Culture shock was coming back here to the United States.
That's true. It was fast. Everything was so fast. It was hard in so many ways. Readjusting and trying to communicate an experience which, even to me, was in some ways incomprehensible.
For me, I was fresh out of Africa. I was Africanized in ways that I didn't really even understand myself. You know, I've been living in the desert. I've been living in isolation in the most remote village in an extremely remote country in the center of the Sahara practically. And all of a sudden we were thrown into the melee of LSD, Vietnam War protests, and chaos.
It was very sad. Martin Luther King had been killed. Bobby Kennedy had been killed. Joan and Ed and I moved to Berkeley. There were helicopters overhead every night with People's Park. The demonstrations, the Vietnam veterans against the war in San Francisco. It was really heady.
America was not a place you wanted to be because all the good people were being killed. And whatever the struggles were about, they were going to be a lot harder because so many people were sort of had their spirit broken by both the killing of these two men as well as the violence that followed their death.
And we wept. We just, you know, I love this country, but sometimes the things that happen here just break my heart. And that really broke my heart.
While I was in Africa, my best friend was killed in Vietnam. Although I didn't know it at the time. I just got letters from him from the jungle saying that he was afraid he was going to get killed. And it turned out when I got back, I learned he had been. So there was this heavy overtone of Vietnam. You know, when you're in Africa and everything is new and strange, you can always say to yourself, well, I could go home. I know the language. I know the streets. I have friends there. I have a place to go back to. But if you stay away long enough, 2 years in our case, and you go back to the States and you don't belong there anymore, there's nowhere to go. You're a lost and displaced person in some sense.
Culture shock was the hardest. It was a much harder coming back to this country than it was to leave it and going to Africa. So when I met my husband, who was in Niger also, but I didn't know him at the time, it was just the right timing. We met in September and we're married in November. And it's been 38 years. So it turns out the love of my life was actually someone who had experienced Niger the same way I did, but we met back in the States in Berkeley, and he's the love of my life, my husband.
So then you met a woman who'd been in Niger as well. So it seems to me like that would be great.
It's great. And seeing all of the Peace Corps people like you guys and everybody, that's great too. We really feel, or at least I feel, part of an organization, and a spirit, an esprit that other people don't quite share, you know. So that's good. And I'm sure people who've been in Vietnam feel it in a different way. They're bonded to their platoon. But we're, hardened and think in certain ways simply because of our experience, because it was so powerful, so so vital.
We all were together, and not because we were crying on each other's shoulders, but we just needed the comfort of being around each other because we'd seen so much. We were happy because we were treated well, but it's very, very sad to see people dying right and left, especially babies. That was not easy. You go and take care of somebody one day, and the next day you go back and the baby would be dead. The fact is, we suffered with those lovely people while we were there. We really tried. You know, and we love the country still, all of us. And that's why we still seek each other. We want to continue experiencing Niger.
They had everything that you get from being a Peace Corps volunteer, which I refer to as a finishing school for middle-class Americans.
And what do you learn in this finishing school?
You learn about where America sits in a world of privilege. You learn that mothers cry every time one of their children dies, even if they've lost 4, 5, 6, 7 before. You learn how to cook without all these fancy things. I mean, I learned how to grow food. I learned how to ride a horse. You learn to see Africans as people, not as political parties, not as the oppressed, not as all these categories we have, but you learn that the world we live in here in the United States is a world that can either shape, facilitate, crush, or ignore a world that can't do the same thing back to us.
The ultimate good that came from this was from the Nigerians seeing us as people and liking us because they had no experience with Westerners. And that to me was a tremendous breakthrough because, I mean, I regarded white people as their colonial oppressors, and they were so innocent, they just didn't think of us that way. They just saw us as people that they eventually liked. And that was the great thing.
So Peace Corps gave me an enormous amount of confidence. I thought if I went there and did that, even though I wasn't convinced I ever did really anything for the Africans, I just felt much more confident. And I went into graduate school and I ran into all these people that had never done anything like that and didn't have the confidence I did.
I was no longer intimidated by these prep school kids from New York who were so glib in seminars and who had, you know, I was a kid from Utah. This time around, I just didn't take any shit. You know, and I was not intimidated by the professors. And I said, you know, I want to write a book of poems as my senior thesis. I'm not going to do a critical thesis because I'm not old enough to be a critic of Matthew Arnold or, you know, T.S. Eliot.
Do you think that being in Niger had any influence on your future chosen career?
Oh, yes. I don't know that it could not. If I didn't understand that or didn't know that, I would be quite ignorant. It had everything to do with the rest of my life. And so it planted all of the seeds that are germinating now and that will continue to germinate. I'm a psychologist and I work with people who are in intense pain for any number of different reasons. And it's taught me to be patient with them as they go on their journey. It's taught me compassion, empathy for others.
Do you have anything more to tell us? We love to talk.
I think that Niger was probably the best experience of any experience in my life. I think I grew tremendously. I developed a lot more self-confidence. I came back a much better person than I went. My values were different, and I looked at things a lot more differently. And I'll never forget it. I mean, I still have things from Niger, and this is what, how many years? 35, 40? 40 years ago, and I still have all my mementos just scattered around the house. and they're part of me, and they always will be.
Tell me why Niger is so special.
Well, I think it's the people. When you go to a country, I guess the first people you meet, you have your first impression. So, and here we have a saying, especially in Hausa, that says, Bak onka allankane, which means your guest is your God. So you have to do everything to please him. So now if you don't, that means you're going to violate our hospitality rules. And this is not Nigerian to violate hospitality. So you noticed, even I like the people in the bush because they're so natural, they're so nice, and they're sharing all the time. I don't like much city people, but I prefer, the bush people because of their simplicity. Even if you come, they're eating, so you can share that food, even though it's not enough.
Nous sommes un pays pauvre, pour dire hospitalier. Nous sommes un pays pauvre. Toi, tu es occidental. Tu prends ta voiture, tu prends n'importe quelle route, tu sors. Ou bien nous sortons ensemble. 19h, on laisse la voiture sur la route et on va marcher à pied. Peut-être on va trouver un petit village, un petit hameau. On va dire salam alaikum. Ils vont nous répondre. On va dire qu'on voudrait passer la nuit ici. Ils ne demanderont pas d'où nous venons. Ils ne vont pas demander où nous allons partir. Ils vont nous donner une natte. Ils vont nous donner de l'eau. S'ils n'ont que 1 kilo de mil ou de riz ou de haricots pour demain, ils vont préparer ça, ils vont nous donner. Ils vont dire, pour demain, Dieu est là.
Niger has a lot of wealth in terms of oil, in terms of uranium, in terms of charcoal, in terms of natural resources. So there's a lot, even though we are 2/3 of the country's desert, but we have a lot of wealth under the ground. As any country, I think Niger aims at being what we call as a part of the concept of nations. The world is developing fast. Now we have new technologies, we have internet. The world is moving fast enough, and Niger is trying to be also at the same pace. And we get experience from other countries, and we would like to be part of that world, that democratic world that we're all trying to build. All it requires good leaders, good governance, and really serious people who believe in their country.
أسود أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسودا أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسودا أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسود أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسود أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسودا أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسود أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس أسودنا ورد الكمال درس من زمن ديس أسود ورد الكمال درس من زمن ديس أسود أمدين ورد الكمال يا زمن وعيس 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 أسودنا شالت يا جركل شالت يا جركل انت الناس تنما